Yes.
Okay. Well, I'm Richard Miller. I'm formerly from Britain, of course. I've been here 48 years or so, and I've worked mostly in construction, and 30 years in what you'd call the water board. And I started as a labourer there in 1976, and I retired as a heavy equipment operator in 2004. What you could, like a JCB operator, that sort of thing. So, as always, I tried to keep this short. But I guess the US is extremely important, as everybody here knows. Despite a lot of the industry leaving here and heading into Asia, the industrial working class moving and so forth. It's a critical and important country. But doing something like this for me reminds me, and I think we remind ourselves, that we're in the midst of a global crisis of capitalism. It's a global crisis, and it's everything that's occurring here is occurring within that framework. And I try to think about what we've been talking about over the last months or a couple of years. And here in the US, I believe it's marked by a collapse or an end of the era in which the two capitalist parties have dominated US political life, the Democrats and the Republicans. That era is definitely over. It's coming to an end, but that's where we're at right now, and that's an important aspect of this, I think. If you take in 2016, when Trump was elected, almost 100 million people never voted. You will often hear here, well, although when people get frustrated, those white people all voting for Trump. Well, 100 million people never voted at all. So this is a culmination of years of disillusionment, anger, and disgust at the two capitalist parties in the United States. And one of the major problems that contribute to that is the leaders of the organized labor, of the trade union movement, who have offered no alternative whatsoever. In a country where a wrestler or a film star can get elected, they will make the claim that there's not a viable alternative. And they bear a great deal of responsibility. Heads of 14 million, an organization with 14 million people in it, have offered the American working class and the middle class no alternative. And so they bear a great responsibility for the rise of Trump also. So here we are, we're at sort of a crossroads of numerous crises that are all coming together at the same time. And where there's the climate change, we talked a little bit about the fires, the hurricanes that from year to year have gotten worse, the ongoing racism and the response to it, of course. I mean, they probably shoot, the cops do more white people than black people, but it's the percentages with regard to the black people. And the protests have intensified. And I think that Ferguson was a major shift, a major turning point with regards to that. They've gone on and on since there. Also, the legacy of colonialism, which affects all of us, of course, but the native people sometimes tend to get forgotten. They don't have the political clout that the black people do. They're off away in their reservations where there's literally horrific conditions that they live under. And then there's the whole slavery issues. There's a lot of talk. I saw a headline yesterday, reparations, let's end racism, get reparations. I mean, reparations isn't going to, they'll pay the fine for slavery. It's not going to stop racism. And in response to all this, and actually a precursor, is been the militarization of the police. We had a big protest here because they bought a Bearcat. It's a sort of like a Humvee, a police vehicle. The buying of surplus military equipment. They prepared themselves for these moments, and then the pandemic hits. So I feel it's important for me, and I think I'm correct in saying that we're in a completely new phase here, and there's no turning back. I mean, there's no returning to the normal, you know, if there was ever such thing as a normal. Now, however, there's huge opposition to this crisis, and not just what we're seeing now, but over the last years, there have been numerous attempts to, but they're all isolated. Standing Rock, there was a 6-month civil war up there with the native people. You've had battles over the environmental issues. You've had dams collapse. The structure is collapsing. You've had environmental battles around gas explosions, dams breaking, and so forth. So there's lots of stuff happening, but it's all isolated. There's no national movement around it. And then, of course, we had the teachers' strikes in 2018, and these were they have drifted into the background a little bit because the trade union leadership, for obvious reasons, because they took place in opposition to the trade union leadership. They took place in states where there was either no established leadership or a weak leadership, which is why they took place. It would have been crushed otherwise. But that was a huge event in the labor movement. And the way those strikes were led were different to the previous 40 years. The left, DSA, labor notes, they've contributed also to not taking the reins of that horse, by not taking the reins of that horse and riding it. So after 4 years on since 2016, there's a strong mood out there. We do live on a continent here. Obviously, it's a much different thing. But there's a strong mood out there, anybody but Trump. If it breathes, I'm voting for it. If it was anybody but Trump. Vote blue, whatever you do, is a common refrain you hear here. And so, as Dave mentioned, tonight is the first debate. I don't normally watch debates, but I'm going to watch this one. But I'm going to watch it for the entertainment value, to be honest with you. And I raise that because there was a poll this week. It was a Wall Street Journal NBC poll. It was yesterday. It found that 70% Americans, quote, for them, debates don't matter much. And for 44%, they don't matter at all. And I'll just give you two examples. One guy says, you never know what's going to come out of their mouths. It's going to make for some entertaining TV. A woman says she's connected to Biden, and I think most people have already made their decisions. I'm connected to Biden and don't need to see the debate, but I wouldn't want to miss it. So that's the situation with that. And there's a lot that points to Trump losing to Biden. He was 8 points ahead, I think it was yesterday. You probably read that 200 retired generals, admirals have come out for Biden. There's been other Republicans that are speaking against Trump and trying to get the Republican Party to fracture a little bit. His speeches and attendances, to be honest with you, to put it bluntly, the term shit show is used a lot often. I mean, it is just insanity. I can't watch the guy generally. But I know for many people, including a lot of people, this is a little liberal area I live in, up to a point. They want this madness to end. There's also a sense of pride because he's such a degenerate human being in his behavior that he's making us look weak. Not weak, but they're ashamed of him as a leader. And there is one thing that Trump could still technically win the Electoral College, because the white working class voters, they're a fairly large section of his supporters, their share of the votes in swing states are much larger. So that I'm not saying that's going to happen, but it could be a possibility. But despite all this, that we've all been burned here. It's been an insane 4 years with Trump and everything that's been happening. And the only thing I can say in relation to the elections, really, it's unpredictable. I just don't feel confident that that I can't say. It's just the craziness goes on. And the other thing is, there's a lot on the horizon for the next few weeks in relation to the pandemic economy. I mean, Michael Roberts, I tell you, he writes some bloody good pieces. He really writes useful stuff, and I use anything he writes, everything generally, on the Facts for Working People blog, of which we're a part, and there's a few of us around that. But on Thursday, 2 days from now, the airlines are threatening to lay off about another 40,000 workers unless they extend the CARES Act up until April next year. In other words, they came before the taxpayer paid the wages of the airline workers up to now, and they want another. I think it's 25 billion, I'm not sure, to pay to prevent them from laying off the workers after Thursday. I mean, it's insane. The nationalization of the airlines should be the immediate response. And of course, the Labour leaders are traipsing up there with the CEOs of the airline companies, pleading with them to have the taxpayer pay the wages of the workers for the next, up until April anyway. Another major occurrences between now and October will be the moratorium on utilities that are ending. There's already, in 14 states, the moratorium on utilities has expired. And in the next 2 weeks, 24 million are set to lose their protection. We're talking here when 9 more states will eliminate the moratorium. We're talking here electricity, sewage, water, and of course there's also rents and things like that. So these, 6 months ago, people were warning not just about the second wave of the pandemic, and we're seeing that as well, but also just the pandemic economy has not yet hit us in the way it will. I wanted to raise I've got a lot of statistics on these, but with the time, I hope we have a good I just hope I can, with what we're doing today, we have a good discussion about it. But I wanted to raise a little bit about the middle class and professional people. It's difficult here because middle class, they call me middle class, but these would be people earning around family income about 200,000, maybe a lawyer and a teacher, or that sort of element. That over the last decade, there's been a massive accumulation of debt here. Before the pandemic, Americans amassed $4.2 trillion in consumer debt. I've got a lot of articles that show, well, you can find them, we can all find them. And so this section of society is also struggling. And I mean, just one example of a family that were earning, she was a lawyer, she's lost a lot of her work, she was working for a small business. Her monthly debt was $9,000 a month. Her and her husband earned $198,000 a year, but $108,000 of that was paying debts, mortgage, car, this, that, and the other. And a money manager said earlier on this week that, quote, there's a professional workforce out there that's getting slammed. So it's not just the poor, and there's a huge section of American society that's under strain, and depression has set in among a lot of people. I see there were more suicides, alcoholism, liquor sales, this sort of thing. So in the next period, I think that we would all agree that we're in for a very volatile and unpredictable period. There'll be in my opinion, there'll be some serious violence here. If Trump loses, I cannot see those militias just doing nothing. I mean, it's so strange. It would be so strange for you if you were heading from Banbury to Swindon and you got stopped by armed militias, not forces of the state, halfway along the I forget the road that used to go there. But if you got stopped by these armed men with all the body gear and they were just regular folks, well, that's what's happened here up in Oregon. They stop people that they might be looting. I mean, you couldn't imagine it happening back home. So I think there will be some of that. And also, it's the heart. I find a hard time comparing it to England because I've left for so long and I don't know exactly what it's like there. But this is the heart of the conspiracy world. I mean, I remember this movie, the anti-vaxxers. There's all sorts of conspiracy people, and you've got to remember, close to 40% of Americans believe Adam and Eve existed and that humans appeared in our present form on this planet. I mean, that's a statistic that's pretty staggering. And the other thing I think that contributes to that, and I know you guys always talk about the Labour Party, we've never had a national workers' party, a national Labour Party in this country. And I think that must make a tremendous difference, that you have had this. No worker goes to Democratic Party meetings. No workers, they vote. When you ask them, what's your politics? What do you, I vote Democratic or I vote Republican. The Democratic Party is not filled with workers arguing and debating. I mean, maybe the Labour Party isn't now, but that potential is there and it's been in the past, I would say. But as Michael Roberts points out, the US economy wasn't in good shape pre-pandemic. And what they're arguing now, more stimulus is needed. I just raised the airlines, for example. What's going to happen in relation to the utilities? People are feared for losing this, losing their heat, their electricity, and so forth. And the stimulus, even the stimulus we made already, has to be paid back. Cities and municipalities will have to find money somewhere. They're in debt. Moody's was saying that in the next 2 years, cities and municipalities are going to need a minimum of about $500 billion. Well, where are they going to get that money? They're in debt. And from what I understand, Jack might know a little more about this, is that cities and municipalities can't run deficits by law. So they have to raise taxes or they have to cut services. Well, that's not going to be easy in the coming period. And the pandemic, what it's done in relation, I say, confident in terms of consciousness, it's revealed the weak underbelly of US capitalism. Why we're in such a state is the failure of US capitalism. They hide away from that and they focus on Trump, and so forth. And so consciousness is never going back. It's not going back. And it's true that the most oppressed, the lowest paid, the most marginalized have been on the front lines, keeping society working, caring for victims. Celebrities in the main have disappeared. I'm glad the sport, which is so dominant here, every day, every bloody minute on television, that's scrambling back. But it's not going to be easy to impose this market failure on workers in the middle class, I believe. Not after what's happened. You see signs down the road, this nursing home, heroes, see down the church, heroes. You know, these people have been getting shit on for decades. There were no heroes. Well, that's gone. It's going to be hard to put that genie back in the bottle. And in terms of the pandemic, that is Trump's weak link. It's the weakest link. And of course, they focus on how he's handled it and everything else. And he's just such a maniac. It's going away. It's drink Dettol. And it's craziness. But one thing I feel that we have to be careful of is this focus on Trump. I put a piece up about his speech on Facebook, about his speech in Minnesota, where he told these white people, he didn't say you white people, but that's who it was, you've got great genes. It was a racist speech. And a Trumper came in and, oh no, it was the taxes. And she said, good on him. She was a Trumper. She said, good on him. The government sets the laws about taxes. And she didn't know it, but she's right. It's not Trump. They all dodge taxes. They're all rotten. The whole system is failing us. But they focus on Trump. They focus on Trump. She was correct about that. And I mentioned it on Facebook. She was correct about that unwittingly. And Bush is cuddly. Michelle Obama says he's her friend. He's my partner in crime. It's disgusting. This horrible individual, George Bush. So Trump there's that tendency to focus on the individual. But the situation is not going to change. US capitalism is weaker. It's in a weaker position on a world stage. They're not going to push the Chinese around. I wanted to say stuff about the whole TikTok bite dance struggle and that between Oracle and Walmart, but I just didn't have time, and I'm not going to do it. But I think that's interesting, and I hope folks keep tabs of that. But it's in the weaker position. Even if Biden gets elected, that's not going to change. In some ways, he's got to prove himself now. He's got to prove he's a man. You know, there's a lot of individual character shit involved here. And just a few days ago, in opposition to Trump's vulgar, crude dealings with the Chinese and our allies even, Biden criticized him. And what did he have to say? He said, we have to make America more competitive. Well, we know what that means. And so no matter how we look at it, there is a storm. I mean, I think that's actually that's a conservative. I think it's a hurricane is more like. There is a hurricane ahead, but joining the OCAW, where I got a lot of my political education, I don't want to use the cliche, but I will. It won't be in a straight line. The struggle will be confused. There'll be ebbs, backward, flows, forward, all of that language we used to use. But particularly here, I think our whole history, the lack of a party, the violence of the state here, we execute children, mentally ill people, and so forth. I mean, there's kids of 15 been in jail for 40 years because they killed somebody when they were 15, you know. It's crazy in some ways. Just in relation to the perfect storm, some people use that term here that they feel it's a revolutionary situation. And Jack and I know I don't know what he's going to say. We purposefully just going to say what we think about the situation. But I know we agree on that there are elements in the left that consider it almost like it's a revolutionary situation. And I think that's not the case. And I think we're not in a revolutionary situation. And the other thing is, all of those other aspects are not here. No party, the left is insignificant, and so forth. So to sort of wrap up, that does not mean I have great faith that the working class will struggle to change society. I mean, I think that I have a black friend, a young woman friend I do a podcast with, and sometimes she gets depressed. And I say to her, she said, I'm not sure I want to have children. She's only 26. She's black woman, dark skinned. It makes a little difference here, the skin tones and all of that. And I say to her, look what's just happened. The black youth and working class, this is a working class movement. It's not the organized working class. There's petty bourgeois leading it. There's all sorts of elements. But this is a working class movement, Black Lives Leadership, that has a lot of middle class types in it. But Kaepernick, the great example is Kaepernick. For 5 years, the billionaires that own the football teams said he was wrong. And overnight, he's right. And I had to point out with her, we mustn't lose sight of this tremendous movement. And we should look at the world effect it had. So while we can't rule out reaction and so forth, we have to be careful. We have to be unconditional. Don't be conditional. And I think remind ourselves that we don't have all the answers. I think all of us here, but we have one answer, and that's the working class will move to struggle. Nothing is guaranteed in this world, though. So anyway, that's my introduction. I hope it's kicked something off with us, and I'm done.